As the Hot Mess Express comes to a halt, what happened to hazard pay? Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Afternoons LA Late. Hope you're good and safe. Afternoons LA Late is every day at 3:30, starting with the check, then going to hazard pay at 4 o'clock, FPUC at 4:30, and finally, check, rent assistance, rent checks at 5 o'clock. Big news about hazard pay, the future of second stimulus, and all that Hot Mess Express today. The elements of what went wrong with the second stimulus negotiations today manifested themselves in comments minutes ago that I have in front of me from Nancy, Chuck, Steve, and Mark as to how far apart the people are. But is the separation based upon numbers caused by hazard pay? We don't know, but Nancy Pelosi minutes ago said that the two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are about a couple $100 billion apart, which ironically is good news, actually great news, because initially they were $2 trillion apart. Yesterday, Mitch McConnell said they were $1 trillion apart, and Nancy now says that there's a couple $100 billion apart. It's unclear what is causing that separation and what's the big ticket item. There is also good news for the purposes of hazard pay, which is a big ticket item, that Nancy admitted that one of the big items that they couldn't reach an agreement upon wasn't hazard pay. It was rather assistance to states. Let me get right to the details. The details are that the second stimulus package had deals on a lot of provisions of the package. Had agreement on the check, had agreement on rent eviction moratoriums, had agreement on student debt repayment during the pandemic, had agreement on mortgage forbearance, had agreement on a lot of provisions. But it didn't have agreement on a big ticket item. And that big ticket item was a lot of money to all the states so that they could provide relief to their citizens. Now, that relief includes hazard pay, but it's not, the $10,000 LA. It's the couple $100 that Louisiana's giving, or the, couple $100 that Texas is giving total. I mean, not just 1 week, I mean total. So that amount of money Nancy delineated in a letter which I obtained minutes ago that says, she says to her colleagues, we are far apart and we couldn't reach agreement on certain things. Is hazard pay in there? No. So that's really great news. Well, hazard pay was not an issue that they couldn't agree upon. So does that mean that hazard pay has been killed? Or does that mean hazard pay has an agreement on? Or does it mean that everyone keeps on forgetting about hazard pay? I think it means that they had an agreement on hazard pay, because yesterday Nancy was talking about hazard pay on broadcast news. She was talking about the frontline workers, the nurses, the grocery store workers, the shippers, and the drivers. So why would you talk about that if you don't have an agreement for them? It seems as just she had an agreement for hazard pay. But what she talks about is the big item then. They're a couple $100 billion apart on money to reopen schools. She proposed $105 billion for school legislation. And here, you ready for this? I mean, don't let your jaw drop, especially if you've had some Botox. Don't want those wrinkles to settle in. Pelosi said that the Democrats have offered $950 billion for states and municipalities, what I just talked about, and the Republicans would not move off of $150 billion. Wow, that's almost $800 billion separation. Well, if she said she's separated by a couple hundred billion, well, that's $800 billion right there. I mean, if you throw anything else on top of that, she'd be separated by $1 trillion. We can all do the math. It's like, how many billions are in $1 trillion? It's a lot of them. It's more than your stimulus check, which you're not getting this week, which is just incredulous. So that is actually great news. I mean, I feel like I'm Inspector Clouseau reporting on hazard pay because no one's telling us anything about it, but everyone's telling us everything about everything else that's in the stimulus package and that is around hazard pay. They're telling us how far they're apart on the numbers. Nancy's saying they're apart by a couple $100 billion, and then I do the reverse math, and I'm like, oh, then it can't be hazard pay you're having a problem with. Ultimately, it makes me pissed off, as you are probably. It's like, just tell us what's going on with hazard pay. I've seen your tweets, which are absolutely incredible. I've seen you're tagging me with Nancy, and you're tagging me with Mitch, and you're tagging me with Mark. And you're like, what's going on with hazard pay? We're entitled to hazard pay. And I see you tagging me with broadcast news, whether it's Rachel Maddow, who I absolutely adore, or, Cuomo, or Don Lemon, who's the bomb. And you're like, can you talk about hazard pay? And I'm like, well, get me on the show. I'll go and talk about hazard pay for you. It's just very disconcerting. Now, ultimately, what I'm always concerned for you about hazard pay is that it's a lot of money and it's owed to you, but will you get it or will you get a watered down version of it? A lot of you have talked about how great the Romney plan it is. It's not $10,000, it's like $5,000, but you absolutely would get it. Romney ensures that under his proposal that the employers must apply, that if they don't apply, they're deep doo-doo, that the employers are required to apply, they're paid to apply, that if they don't apply, they can be prosecuted. It's very serious. Whereas the Democrat plan is like, hey, if you feel in the mood to apply and you have your feet up in the sand and you're just not doing anything at the moment, go apply for your employees. Otherwise, don't worry about it. It's like, oh, come on already. It's like, you gotta apply. Now, some of the viewers overnight have been asking me questions about their hazard pay, and I gotta tell you, don't put the cart before the horse, as I thought. Don't mess up the expression, dude. It's like, it's not the horse before the cart. It's the cart before the horse. Otherwise, okay, whatever. You got the point. Don't put the cart before the horse, because we don't have even an agreement about hazard pay. So people are DMing me and going into IG and going in the private for EID, and they're like, hey, my daughter works here. You think she can get some of that hazard pay money? I'm like, there is no hazard pay money yet. We don't even have an agreement. It's not funded. It doesn't exist. Someone sent me a very nice message overnight. She said, I worked at a grocery store during the pandemic. I now have been offered a much more lucrative job to work at a pharmacy. Should I take the pharmacy job because I'm worried about losing my hazard pay? No, you should not worry about losing your hazard pay. And yes, you should take the better job if you like it. Here's the rub. The great news about hazard pay, and this is really sort of the silver lining in this story, which I'm really trying to search for a silver lining, is that if you work those hours as an essential worker during this pandemic, thank you. And your hours will be rewarded if and when hazard pay becomes a law. So the fact that hazard pay is not becoming a law this Friday or next Monday or next Tuesday at the moment, by all indications, because no one can get an agreement, everyone wants to go home and sip Mai Tais and hope they get reelected in the fall. Good luck on that. Don't think that you're never going to get compensated for hazard pay. Just don't expect the compensation to come now. A lot of people think hazard pay is paying right now. It was never going to pay right now. It was going to take a ramp-up time. But even the hope of hazard pay being paid soon was real, and now it doesn't seem like it's manifesting itself. So I don't want you to change your life. I don't want you to decline work, and I don't want you to think this or that because of a bill that isn't gaining traction. But on the other hand, the great news is that if and when the bill is passed, whether it's, September, 2023, I'm being facetious, but you'll get your payment for what you did, and thank you for what you did. I'm thanking you for what you did. I don't think Mitch is going to thank you for what you did. There we go. It's really quite confusing. Nancy said the Democrats proposed to secure more concessions on ensuring a safer work environment and voting environment in the place of work. In a joint statement after the jobs report was released today, Nancy and Schumer said that the economic recovery spurred by the investments Congress has passed is losing steam, and more investments are still urgently needed to protect the lives and livelihoods of the American people. It's the first part of the sentence that just reeks of hazard pay, to protect the lives. Ultimately, you got to remember that hazard pay included protections for you. And the concern is that as this pandemic spreads, that those protections will not yet have become law. What will happen? Well, and what's going to happen later today? Well, if you watched our video earlier minutes ago on the check at 3:30 Pacific Standard Time, I told you that Steve has said that he's not coming back to negotiate anymore, which proves he's a liar, because he said last week he was going to get it done with Nancy I said this week he's going to get it done with Nancy with an agreement, whether or not he likes the agreement or not. Well, now he's saying, I'm not even coming back. So see you later. Hasta la vista, baby. He's just like, get your butt in there and get it done. Nancy also has said much the same as well back to him. She says, I'm not getting any progress with them, so I'm not sitting around anymore. They had a meeting this morning. They're supposed to have a meeting this afternoon. There's no indications whether that means going to make progress. The president's threatening executive order. He's not going to give you an executive order for hazard pay, and he can't give you an executive order for hazard pay. That's always going to seem to be like the end tagline of these videos is, what can the president do with executive orders? President can't issue executive orders to send out money. He can't. There's no authority by the president to send out money. It's an act of Congress is required to send out money. So here we are. Where's my $10,000, LA? Not coming today. May still come. Don't lose hope. Don't go to the pony races and bet something hoping you're going to get $10,000 tomorrow, because that was never going to happen. It was never going to come tomorrow. But don't decline employment. Don't change your life. Don't think that something's happening and you should do something based upon the wishes of a group of congressional leaders who do much of nothing. That is the best advice that I can give you. We won't ever know until someone tells us what happened to hazard pay. We won't know whether it died a quick death during these negotiations of the last week, or was Lily in there to the very end, until someone actually tells us it. And if you tag Nancy or tag Chuck and say, hey, what happened to hazard pay? Were you still negotiating for it? I think they'll say yes, but we won't know what the Republicans' answer was to it. Ultimately, coming up next on LA Late is afternoon's LA Late's FPUC video at 4 o'clock, and then rent assistance. Please hit that subscribe and alert button in front of this channel so you can alert when something comes up. And I would not be surprised if something came up in the middle of the night or a strange time and there's this hallelujah moment. I also am not surprised if you see an insane executive order issue that's not going to hold up. And I'm not being partisan. I'm just telling you, he can only issue executive order for eviction moratoriums, which he should, absolutely should. I mean, that would really save a lot of people's problems right now. But he can't do it for hazard pay. As always, stay with LALATE, hit that subscribe and alert button, and stay motivated, stay smiling, and have a great afternoon.